Hi, Sophie.
Hi, Sin.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Snack Covenant, episode 307.
Oh my god!
It's such an emergency that my alarm started ringing.
The mech alarm is going off.
Armored Core 6 has been finally announced.
I thought it would never come out, yeah.
So, a trailer has dropped yesterday during the Game Awards.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts and impressions?
Okay, so, when I said I wasn't expecting this to come out, I was serious. Because I knew that, the next From game would be a mech game. But the idea that it would be Armored Core 6, like an actual numbered entry continuing on from 5, I assumed that would never happen. I assumed they would just want to start over.
Mm-hmm.
They'd done other mech series, like they'd made Chrome Hounds was one of them, a Steel Battalion,
Metal Wolf Chaos.
Metal Wolf Chaos.
The best one.
Yep, Frame Grind. Like, they'd made these other mech games, and I would just assume, okay, maybe, it's a new era for From. The last Armored Core game was literally almost a decade ago. So it would make sense to be like, okay, it's just a new series now. So the fact that this is Armored Core 6 is, to me, the biggest shock of it, that it's actually literally called Armored Core 6. So we've talked a little bit about Armored Core on and off on the channel. I've streamed it a few times. So just briefly for people who are maybe want a little primer on it, it's the series that From was probably best known for in the West prior to the Souls games. It was, I think, the second or third game they released was Armored Core, and it was a game that ran on the same engine as Kingsfield on the PS1. And it was a game about you're a mercenary who worked for a series of different factions. You took missions for them. You used the money you got from the missions to increasingly sort of buy parts for and customize your own little robot that you were taking with you. And the appeal of the series was that customization. It was you could just spend forever in just this sort of virtual garage building the robot of your dreams and really fine-tuning it, and you had to take into account things like the weight of all the parts, and later on they add things like how much energy is this draining, how much heat is it generating. You have to sort of start playing around with things what if something is draining too much power, I have to add a new generator to it, but the generator is now making it too heavy, so I had to swap out the legs for something else, and it just became this real, really, really obsessive, detail-oriented series. I've mentioned this before, but I really got into it because there was a demo of Armored Core on a demo disc that came with a magazine, which was a thing that we had when I was your age. And on that demo, it was just 2 missions, but they let you play them over and over again, and they had most of the parts, I think, from the game were available. So I would just spend forever playing that demo and just collecting money and buying new parts and just trying out different robot designs over and over again. So I played Armored Core through to Armored Core 3 quite a lot in high school. Kind of fell off after that because I couldn't afford consoles anymore, and then I picked them up toward the end of the PS3 era again. That's the series sort of part I'm least familiar with. I'm most familiar with PS1 and PS2 stuff, but I have played the PS3 stuff. And it was just really strange to see a new Armored Core rather than a new mech game.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got an official synopsis of the story here, which is, this is directly from Bamco/From, and they're saying, a mysterious new substance was discovered on the remote planet Rubicon 3. As an energy source, the substance was expected to dramatically advance humanity's technological and communications capabilities. Instead, the substance caused a catastrophe that engulfed the planet and surrounding stars in flame and storms, forming the burning star system. Almost half a century later, the same substance resurfaced on Rubicon 3, a planet now contaminated and sealed off by the catastrophe. Extraterrestrial corporations and resistance groups fight for control over the substance. The player infiltrates Rubicon 3 as an independent mercenary and finds themselves in a struggle over the substance with the corporations and other factions.
That's interesting, Sophie, because I have a different synopsis. My synopsis says, following a catastrophe on Earth, the planet is covered in a toxic fog. The crew in the space station must decide whether to risk their lives to get home and search for survivors, or stay safe in the station's algae symbiosis system.
Thank you, Sin. Okay, so Miyazaki is credited as what's called initial game director. So I'm guessing like he laid the groundwork for everything. But then it says that after the initial development, it was taken over by Masaru Yamamura, who was involved in a lot of Sekiro and is the inspiration for Chikage Yamamura in Bloodborne.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Chikage
yeah.
Yamamura.
And it's been in development since 2017, apparently,
Wow.
which means it's on PS4, so I'm safe for another year.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
I will never buy a PS5. So we're just going to recap the trailer. It's not a particularly long trailer. It's all cinematic. There's no gameplay. So we start by seeing a strange sort of red electrical pulse that then appears to generate this massive red shockwave that fries a planet and most of the stuff around it, assuming that is the mysterious energy source and like the burning, this is the Rubicon system, it's all burning up, as described in the story. And then we see a little bit after that, and the whole surface is blanketed by ash and ruins, and the sky is still burning a little bit. Actually, very, very similar to the end of Elden Ring, when you have the ash-covered Leyndell with the little flares of red in the sky from the Erd tree. And in that, we see a kind of scavenger robot that is walking around. It looks almost like Death Stranding style. It has this sort of big like backpack thing on, and it's picking up these ruins out of the ash. While that's happening in the distance, you see this battle going on. There is a four-legged mech, kind of like centaur sort of design, and that is fighting a bunch of kind of lesser robots, and it's like it vaults over them, and while it's fighting them, you can see it generating this shield around itself. And then when it lands, it unleashes this sort of like close range. I don't know if it's like chaff or grenades or something, like from one of its arms. And then we just see a bunch of like, I've just noted these down as like, these are shots you would have gotten in an older Armored Core trailer. It's like if you go back and you watch the trailers, particularly for like Armored Core 5 or Armored Core Verdict Day, you can imagine these exact shots being in them. There's like shots of these like robots in hangars being lowered into things. There's shots of like big kind of like Osprey looking like carrier craft dropping the robots. It's all very like, the focus is on sort of industrial tech and military tech and things. Almost no humans. I don't think there even are any humans in any of these shots, but the focus is on the technology rather than like seeing people doing things. You can tell it's like very, the aesthetic is very like, again, like I said, it's all industrial, it's all tech, it's all like sort of ash deserts and things like that. Very, very different to what we've seen in the Souls games, obviously. And yeah, so prior to this is why I was surprised it was Armored Core. There were a series of leaks from someone on Reset Era called Red Licorice. And Red Licorice gave us a synopsis of the story that is very interesting to compare to what we have now. Because in Red Licorice's version of the story, the mysterious energy source is called Melange.
A melange?
I was thinking more like that's the spice from Dune.
Oh!
Yeah, it was Melange and it was found on the planet Bashtar.
Mélange à trois?
Mélange à trois. So I am assuming that like those were maybe the early names instead of being like the Mysterious Energy and Rubicon 3, it was Melange and Bashtar and they changed them. Mm-hmm. Probably a wise move considering like Dune is really back in everyone's minds right now and you maybe want to do, maybe they will call it Melange, it's called a Mysterious Energy Source. That synopsis is interesting because it mentions that, and it also mentions that there are cultists on the planet. So it mentioned like there'll be like corporations and the military and things fighting over this mysterious substance, but also cultists.
Sophie?
Yes?
The Snag Covenant predicted Armored Core.
I know.
Because cultists are all of us.
Yeah, well, all of us. It's a very like... It's odd for cults that there's no pyramid power structure.
No.
All the cultists are equal.
Yes.
As long as you like eating. So yeah, it mentioned cultists, and like all the Armored Core games have always had like a bunch of weird factions and things in them that you don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily like interact with that much. Like there'll be like little terrorist cells or like gangs or something that will show up for like a couple of missions and not be mentioned again. But yeah, this specifically mentions cultists, and like my knowledge of Armored Core is not exactly encyclopedic, but I have played most of it. And I don't remember there being cultists in it. So that's a very interesting development. And it mentioned like there would be a very big scale and a wide variety of maps, which I'll come back to later on. It also mentioned that there'd be snow in it, and I think the snow is them seeing the ash. Because if you didn't know that was ash, you might think it was snow. And interestingly, the Red Licorice League mentions that the combat is, they called it Souls like. Now, the Armored Core games had always had like melee in them, that had always been an option since the first one. You had always had the ability to have like some sort of melee option as like I mean the Moonlight Sword is in it. Like you can get the Moonlight Sword in Armored Core 1 and stick it to the mech. But like I would not have ever described the combat when you were in melee as Souls like at all. But like it's described here as like no, it felt like the melee combat was very Souls like. Like there was long range combat obviously, but you could also get in close. And Red Licorice also provided some screenshots. They're very, very blurry, and parts of them are obscured, I think, for NDA reasons. But there is one in particular that looks like one of the mechs is mid sword swing, and they're leaving this like trail behind it, and it straight up looks like it's the middle of like a Dark Souls or Sekiro animation. And given that like it's the Sekiro guy, kind of not surprised that like they maybe went in that direction. Like Armored Core 5 made it so like one of your arms could just be a series of rotating chainsaws. Like that like there was a melee was always in there, but it I would not have described it as anything like Souls combat. It was like a very specialized thing that you could do. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
not like I'm seeing in the screenshots here. Now another piece of like leaked stuff that's very interesting is quite a while ago we got some concept art that we were told was for the new From Met game. And it looks like it's an earlier version of that scavenging robot. Like it's this robot and it's got these chains on its back and it's dragging bits of other robot behind it. So you can kind of see like where that's coming from. Like, okay, it's like it's finding ruined robots and it's taking them with it. Now, what's interesting about that image is that if you look at it, it doesn't really look like it's on another planet or in the far future. The background city that it's in, it actually weirdly looks a lot like Yharnam. It just looks like a sort of um, very old looking like European city. It does not look like it's in space at all. It doesn't look like it's very futuristic in comparison to the shots that we've seen that are all very, very like, like rocket bases and military bases. And like, I think there's one that briefly shows like a sewer in it, but like you don't see anything like the background of that image. And yeah, interestingly, in that image, the mech's also got, it looks like a pick or a scythe or something in one hand, like that's a melee weapon. Yeah, so again, like that's really like a little odd to me. So basically, all these came out before we knew it was Armored Core 6. And that's kind of why I didn't think it was going to be Armored Core 6, because a lot of those things to me don't really sound like Armored Core. They sound like they're a new IP. So we're recording this like not very long after the trailer actually dropped, but there's been enough time for people to ask us like our opinions and some questions and things. We haven't had that many because it hasn't been that long, but thankfully, one of them's quite broad. So this one question can stand in for everybody else's for now.
Okay.
And that was from one of our Twitter followers called Ruisu. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Ruisu's question is did Sophie see the trailer yet? Is there much to speculate about for a long-term fan of the series? So like I think there is a fair bit to discuss there, and I want to get into specifically why I didn't think this was Armored Core 6 when I first heard about it. Because like the way that this is set on another planet is very like not what I think of when I think of Armored Core. Because the Armored Core games, they've been like it's science fiction, it's the far future, but the progress of like space exploration has always been limited to just like very, very close to Earth. So it's been space stations, the moon, and sometimes Mars. So the idea that not only is this set on another planet, but they're basically like exploring other planets. There is a whole planetary system that is now like contaminated by some weird energy source. Like that really that's very new. Like I've not seen very much like that before. It's always pretty much been like Earth, underground bits of Earth, underground bits of the moon, Mars, and underground bits of Mars. So the notion of like going further out than that is like that's very new. One of the things though about Armored Core is like it's very very frequently about there being lost technology that was like much more advanced than where it is now and people digging it up. That's been something since the very first game. You can kind of see that even now with them digging up like the old tech on Rubicon that I'm guessing is like it's probably more advanced stuff from before this catastrophe ruined everything. But yeah, the presence of like there is another planet, there's like this firestorm that's like ruining a whole planetary system and everything. That implies it's like it's way further in the future. Either that or like because of all this lost tech, like it's not that far in the future and people just rediscovered like interplanetary travel that had been buried somewhere.
You know, when there's the shot of flame engulfing the Earth? That reminded me of Terminator 2.
A little bit, yeah, yeah. So one of the things that we see in the trailer is, you know, when the mech makes that like sort of weird shield around itself, right?
Yeah.
That is a mechanic they brought in Armored Core 4 that's called Primal Armor. So Armored Core does not let you heal during missions in the way that like the Souls games do. So you have a massive pool of like damage you can take, but once that's gone, it's gone. Um, so what Armored Core 4 did, and this is also carried over into like some other ones, is that it introduced this thing called Primal Armor that's basically like a regenerating shield that you have around yourself that can absorb certain amounts of damage, but like it can also go down if it's penetrated right. That was something that like within the story of Armored Core, it was powered by this stuff called Kojima particles.
Oh yeah, Kojima
Which yeah,
particles.
you remember that part because we talked about it and you started laughing, right?
uh,
So the thing about Kojima particles is that within the story of Armored Core 4 and Armored Core 4 Answer, the Kojima particles sound a lot like the mysterious Rubicon energy thing, where it's like we discovered this weird like energy crap. And it gives us all of this power, but unfortunately, the more we use it, the more it contaminates the Earth. And it's like this deadly sort of like power. If it's overused, it can like render parts of the planet uninhabitable because there's all this Kojima background radiation now. That is like that sounds exactly like the whole premise of like, oh, we discovered this mysterious energy source and now it's ruined the planet. Like that's Kojima particles didn't like explode in a giant firestorm, but they're more just like radiation. They just make parts of the planet like you can't really live there anymore. You can't breathe the air. And I think they may be powered by that this time because I'm guessing Kojima particles aren't going to be a thing on Rubicon. And you mentioned like the red sort of like flame, like it doesn't look like flame. It's like very very deep red.
yeah.
If you look at the very end of the trailer when the mech is boosting away, the flame that is left behind by the booster is also very very red. And I'm wondering if like the mechs in this will derive their power from literally from the flame of Rubicon. Like that's going to be the sort of tech MacGuffin that drives like why you have new abilities this time and maybe why the mechs are behaving differently. Maybe they're faster and like they can do like soul style combat. It's going to be justified by saying, okay, well, there's the Rubicon flame powering them, so they behave differently. Similar to that, the combat speed that you're seeing in the trailer, again, that is much closer to Armored Core 4 and Armored Core 4 Answer. The first kind of like the number of Armored Core games is kind of confusing because this is Armored Core 6, but it's actually the 24th. Because what they'll do is they'll have like a game, and then that game will be a self-contained universe that will have multiple games within it. So when I say like Armored Core 4 and Armored Core 4 Answer, it's because there was Armored Core 4, and then there was Armored Core 4 Answer, which was the sequel to Armored Core 4, but not Armored Core 5, which was its own game, which also had a sequel called Armored Core Verdict Day. One of the things about Armored Core 4, in contrast to 1, 2, and 3, is that it made everything really fast. So it did things like the primal armor system, like it made the mech sort of behave slightly differently. It added quick boost. So prior, like armored cores handled a lot like tanks. even if they had legs, they behaved like a tank. Starting with 4 and 4 answer, they get very, very fast. They actually start behaving more like jets. Like, there's a lot of sort of aerial sequences, like you can sort of jet through levels. When you engage with other mechs, it's almost like a dogfight between two planes, which is, like, again, very different to what we saw before. Actually, one of the things that happens throughout the series development is the mechs actually get smaller. Like, they start off as these big kind of lumbering things, and then throughout the development of the series, they become more light and agile and small. So, like, the mechs in the first game, like, you can just stand on top of cars and crush them like they're ants. Like, they're enormous. And then by Armored Core, like, kind of 4 answer 5 era, they're only about like 5 to 10 meters tall. Like, they're not supposed to be that big. And that also looks like it's hard to judge the scale in the trailer because everything is a mech. But there are some screenshots and stuff where you can see kind of like, okay, I think that thing in the background might be a car, and that looks a bit like a guardrail, so that might be the size of a person. You can roughly see they roughly seem to be in the sort of 5 to 10 meter area that those like more recent ones were in. Late at night, I think of you, your vision floods my mind. So one thing that interested me was the description in the Red Licorice leaks of there being it said a huge map singular. And then it said there was going to be a wide variety of maps. So Armored Core has always been a mission-based thing. Like, it hasn't been a big open world or an interconnected series of levels. It's been like, you have not even like a hub, there's not an area. You have like a screen, and it's like, pick the mission you want to do, and then it'll deposit you just drop in that area. And you do it, and you have, like, it's like a barrier that you're not allowed to go beyond. So, like, there's a big implied world, but you only see little chunks of it that aren't necessarily physically connected to each other. This almost made it sound like it was going to be closer to one of the Souls games or Elden Ring, like just a big environment that's all connected together, but I'm really not sure. The way it says, like, an overwhelming scale map singular makes me wonder if, like, it is going to be more like that, and maybe, like, you'll revisit the same areas over and over again to do different missions in them, rather than sort of like moving between them as discrete, almost like levels or like Mega Man or something. And so the scavenger mech was also kind of interesting because there hasn't really been anything like that before. There's always been like junk lying around the battlefield that you could sort of like, like discarded weapons and things that you could sometimes kind of pick up and use later on. Like, you couldn't use them in the mission, but like, you'd find like stuff lying around, and if you interacted with it, it would like unlock that part for you to use later on. This looks like it's like that sort of scavenging I haven't really seen before. What's notable, I guess, is like the scavenger mech I don't think is us.
Mm-hmm.
Because it looks like our character would be the one that's involved in the fighting. But like, it's also possible that that is us, and like, we're building up to being that. Like, we start off in a little like scavenger mech, and then we have to like scavenge parts to make ourselves a better one to start fighting. Interesting thing they mentioned is that like the planet is like quarantined, like you can't go there because of this weird energy thing, which makes me assume, okay, there's probably no trade outside of the planet, so I'm guessing a lot of the economy would be based on digging things up. Like, if there's all this sort of pre-catastrophe tech that's buried, you would really want to, like, get access to that. Like, that might, like, you like Fallout.
Yeah.
Almost like that, where, like, the economy of the planet is based on finding stuff from before things went bad and selling it.
Mm-hmm.
Because that sort of makes sense if you're not allowed, if it's like a quarantined place and it's very hard to enter or leave. So going back to Melee, like, there's a shot in the trailer of a mech that looks like it has a pile bunker. A pile bunker is like, it's basically the weapon that the stake driver in Bloodborne is patterned after. It's like a big sort of like pneumatic piston that like you punch stuff with, and then the piston thing like shoots out and does a ton of like impact damage. It's used to like open tanks and stuff. It's very big in like mech series, like it's in Front Mission as well. Mm-hmm. And that makes me wonder if like there is going to be again more of a focus on Melee this time around. And yeah, that's pretty much what we can get from the trailer. And yeah, the other question I got, this is from someone called Miss Littletall, who I'm friends with, but we haven't had her on the podcast. And she was just saying, like, am I going to have to play the other Armored Core games to understand this one? the thing is, like, I don't think you even have to play the old Armored Core games to understand the old Armored Core games.
And you don't have to play the previous Armored Core games either. You can go to Acer Static's channel and see the streams and videos that he has made about Armored Core as
Yeah.
well as other Souls games.
Yeah, so we all like Armored Core, even if we don't talk about it that much. Ace has talked about it way more than us. If you want to hear us talk about Armored Core, there's a video on our channel where we talk about it with Ace. Well, I talk about it with Ace. You were there in spirit, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the Portal.
Oh, that's right, the Portal.
It's okay, I'm okay.
Oh, good, yeah. But yeah, I feel like the fact that it's been 10 years and, like, this starts with, like, the planet being completely destroyed. There's no way it's not some sort of, like, this is essentially going to be self-contained. It's going to wipe away everything that happened before. And it's going to, like, yeah, like, you can see bits and pieces of things that'll be in there. Like I mentioned, the Primal Armor is there. Primal Armor is, like, a plot point in Armored Core 4. But, I don't know if it'll be called Primal Armor this time. It may be, it's clearly the same thing, but I'm sure it'll be explained differently. So yeah, I am very excited, and I really hope that we get some gameplay soon, so we have a bit more to talk about.
Yeah. Did you know the Portal also tried to take Jersey Miyazaki?
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, he was having none of it.
No.
Hey, it's FormSoftware President Hidetaka Miyazaki here to explain the story of Armored Core. Armored Core was actually the first series I worked on at FormSoftware. I worked on one called Armored Core 4 Answer. They called it that because it was the sequel to Armored Core 4, which you'd think would be Armored Core 5, but apparently we can't do things normally, so it has to have some kind of 4 pun in the name. I suggested Armored Core forget about it, but they wouldn't let me because at that point I hadn't made them $1 billion. By suggesting that a Kingsfield would be more successful if it didn't take you a fucking afternoon to turn around. So, the plot of Armored Core 4 Answer concerns the extremely subtly named character Maximilian Thermidor, who... Sorry, there's a fucking dimensional portal in my room. Get the fuck out of here, you fucking dimensional portal! What was I talking about? I don't remember, and also it's time for my lunch break. Ooh, they packed onions. Back to the podcast. Onions.